Good morning, everyone, to today's Keep Up with Pryme. My name is Laura Andradas. I'm marketing lead at Pryme Global, and together with Aske Holst, product manager at Pryme Global, we will show you some of our new features coming from the past two releases, the release we had in October and the release we had in November. We'll also take a deep dive into recharging expenses, and we will leave some time at the end of the session for the Q&A. So let's start with, advanced projects. Here we would like to remind you to test your entire invoicing workflow in a sandbox to make sure that your customizations are working. Because, once you turn on the enhanced invoicing, you will notice some technical changes. For instance, you will see that there are fewer pop-up screens during the whole process. So please do test your invoicing workflow. And now getting onto the actual application enhancements, there's a new draft invoice specification report that works exactly the same as for posted invoices. We have made the archiving projects more flexible, and we have added a new field, the bill to email field for sales invoices. Let's see what's new for Pryme Time, our intelligent time tracking solution. Now you can schedule reminder emails for both managers and resources who have to submit their timesheets so that they can be sent out regularly. When creating time entries from Outlook, there are some project details that are populated from previous entries. Which details are those? Well, the project, the work type, and the task. And now it's more easy to access both time tracking entries and the calendar in the mobile rule center. And now talking about Pryme Time, if you are already using it, please be reminded that you can have a free session with us in order to get the most out of the application. And if you're not using Pryme Time yet, be reminded that you can get it for free so that you can test it out. Moving forward to Pryme Fund Management, now you can post your fund usage to the GL. So this enables that tracking and reporting of fund allocations within your financial reports. And last but not least, Pryme Matters, our accounting and legal practice management software. Here you now can post selected time entries directly from the timesheet, and there's a new filter for write-offs. Now I would like to hand over the presentation to Aske, and we'll see each other at the end of the session for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's jump right into it. First off, with advanced projects, as mentioned, we have a number of enhancements. We have the draft invoice specification, the archiving of projects, and the bill to email. So let's have a look at those and see what that looks like in practice. So on the projects, we have an option to define a invoicing specification. That is not something new. We've had that for some time, and we can set whatever kind of model we want for the invoice specification. In this case, I've created one which I call all. So we will get a specification for that includes the price and the quantity and expenses and everything else. And you can set up different profiles. This has existed for a couple of years. You've always been able to post your invoice and then get a specification with the posted invoice. But what if you want to review the invoice before you post it to ensure that that specification has all the right details? That we allow now. So if I create a invoice from this project, I now will get my draft invoice, and I will be able to get a draft invoice specification. In this case, I have an invoice with 3 grouped lines, and I would like a specification of all the work done. I can do that from the print send, where I can open up a draft invoice specification and get that printed. And so I will see all the details, and this will look exactly like the invoice specification you will get with the hosted invoice. So similar to having a draft invoice that you can use before posting, we can now also do a draft invoice specification as well. When it comes to projects, we have a new feature that came with Business Central to allow archiving. And we've also now enhanced progresses to enable that feature. So on a project, you can now select to archive that project. So if you open up a project card or a project plan, we now have that archive button. And if you archive a project, a copy of that project structure will be saved with the task structure at the point of archiving, and you can then later review it. So if I archive this project at this point in time, I can see that I now have one archived version that I can open up and look at. And of course, now it looks exactly the same, but then I have that archive of what did my project look like at that actual time. Lastly, we have on the invoices created. In some scenarios, you could have a situation where you want to make sure that the email address comes from the right place. And this is complicated. You could have one customer on the project that is a sell to customer, and you could have another customer that you bill to. We even allow for you to split the invoices to multiple bill to customers, etc. And so the question is, who should you send the invoice to if you send via email? In the past, the default has been to use the Business Central logic, where it will look at the different possible customers and find one that has an email address assigned. And that might not always be the right case. And so now we have an option to use the email address from the bill to customer, because in a lot of cases, it is the customer that you're going to bill that should also receive the invoice. And that is a new feature. So that is a toggle that you can turn on, and then you will be using the bill to customer's email address. Next up, we have Pryme Time, where we now have the scheduling of reminder emails, the auto assignment of project details for recurring appointments, and improved navigation in the mobile role center. So for the schedule reminder, that is more of a setup thing. When you're creating a setup for your system, you can open up the Pryme Time setup. And if you want to have reminders go out for reminding people about timesheet that have not been submitted, that either being to the person who submitted the timesheet or to the manager who is responsible of the person who didn't set that up, then instead of going in and creating those job queues, we can now do that directly. I can go in here, set schedule reminder. It will create a job queue for me. It will suggest to send these out on Monday mornings at 8, but of course I could change that to some other date. The only thing I need to do is set the status to ready. For the mobile, I will not show the mobile version here, but basically we've added a number of new buttons for you to be able to access the time tracking entries and the time tracking calendar. Then we have related to the time tracking that if you are using time tracking and you're using the synchronization from calendar function, If you're pulling in calendar entries, which are for an appointment which is recurring and you have reported on time before. So let's say you have the same status meeting every Monday morning. If you once have reported time on that and decided what project and task that goes on, the next time you pull it in, it will reuse that same project and task automatically, assuming that a recurring meeting is always on the same project and task. And this is the first step in a number of changes we are making to try to help you populate some of this information. If we can figure out what project or what task or what work type it probably should be, we will pre-populate that. So reducing the number of fields that needs to be filled in. For Pryme Fund Management, we've added a single feature in this release, but it's one of great importance. It is the ability to post fund usage to the general ledger. The use case scenario for this is that for funding, we of course have a separate fund ledger. And in this fund ledger, you can track how much you have received in grants. You can track how much of that you have reserved for different purposes, and you can track how much of that money you've used for different projects or different purposes. In some cases, you would like to also have that appear in the general ledger. That could be for income recognition purposes or other reporting purposes. And so there is a feature now to enable that posting to GL. So if I open up my, actually I should open up my funding setup. There's now a post usage to GL option that you can check. If you set this up, there is also a requirement to now have a posting setup because we need to define what GL accounts to be used. And that will be defined in the fund posting setup. So you will set up just like you would do with general posting setup or VAT posting setup, other posting setups, combinations of different posting groups that define different accounts. What is a bit special here is that we are not only using 2 posting groups, we're actually using 3 posting groups. One will be the project posting group, the second will be the funder posting group, or as it is known to most people as a customer posting group, and the last is a fund posting group. The fund posting group is a new concept where you define different posting groups for different kinds of funds. In this case, I have one for donations and one for grants. And then I can make a setup for each of the different combinations. In this case, I only have one project posting group, and I say if it is a domestic funder and it is a donation, then it's posted to one set of accounts. If it is domestic funder and it's a grant, then it's posted to another set of accounts. And of course, if you have multiple funder posting groups and multiple project posting groups, that setup will grow and be larger. That also means that on a fund, you would need to define the fund posting group for that fund. And so with that, on your projects that you have, in this case, I have a small charity project here. I can open up my fund allocation. I can see that I have so far used 2,200 of the almost 22,000 I have in funding. I want to post this and I press my post usage. Now this gets posted not only to the fund ledger, but also to the general ledger. So if I search for my GL registers, I should be able to see that we now have a entry here, and I can see that I have, in this case, 2 postings made of 20 to 100, one in credit and one in debit. Last but not least, we have in Pryme Matters that we have now an option to post time entries directly from the time entries. And we also have an option in the client engagement report for write-offs. So on the timesheet, we've always had the option to create entries, of course. And the idea has always been that when you finish your timesheet, you then submit it and it might go for approval. In some scenarios, primarily in legal and accounting, there might be a need to invoice something very early. That could be a client where you completed the work and you want to have the invoice out right now while they still have money. It could be a company which is close to going bankrupt or insolvency or something where you want to make sure that you're in the first in line to get paid. And so what we've now enabled is an option to say post now. And with the post now option, that will post that entry immediately. Now, there is a setup to this to allow this direct posting, because this, of course, means that it circumvents all the regular controls. So this is something that you will need to set up on a resource by resource basis. In this case, I would need to set up that for Prakash, we can allow this immediate posting. And the immediate posting means that the time entry goes directly into the invoice suggestion and it can be picked up for invoicing. The second part is the report we have for client engagement, which gives you a detailed overview of all the different entries we have in regards to a client. And we now have added a option to also either include or not include write-offs. So it's just an extra option. So if you only want to see where you have something where there's a write-off of the time, you could say it's something where write-offs are bigger than 0. Then you only get the lines for the write-offs, or you could say you don't want to include the write-offs. So small change, but it can make a lot of difference in this regard. This concludes the changes we've done in our apps. And I think with that, I will switch gears and we will go into looking a bit about expenses and recharging expenses. So most of you will always already know how to work with expenses. Expenses could come from expense sheet. They could come from a journal posting. They could come from a purchase invoice. And that, of course, will always be a cost to the project. But what if we are going to recharge those expenses? First of all, we can set that up on the project if expenses are chargeable or not. So opening up any project in here, on the specific task, we have a setting saying, is this rechargeable expenses or not? So for my client meeting here, I can see that expenses are marked as being chargeable. So that is the default on the task. But secondly, we can also define on the expense itself or the type of expense, what is the default setting? So if I open up this for restaurant or food, we have some rules about cost, but also about pricing. And of course, I could set my pricing principle here, but I can also set it in the expense prices. So if I open up the expense prices here, I could set up a general rule for when we recharge this. First of all, it should be chargeable. or it should not be chargeable, or should we take the default from the task? I think in most cases, we would like to take this from the task. We wouldn't always override that unless you have a certain kind of expense that is never going to be recharged, no matter what. And then you have your profit calculation principle. Many cases, it would be that we recharge at cost, but there could also be a case for a percentage add. So we say we add 10% to the cost. So if we have an expense of 100, we will recharge it at 110. That can be a general setup, or it can be specific for certain projects or certain tasks. It can even be date controlled, just like any other price list. So this is a way to set up the rules for this. Here we can also look at the rules for VAT, and we will get back to that in just a minute, but that part is really important. So with that set up, I can open up my expenses. That could be in a expense journal. And here I can create my lines. And of course, if I now create a new line, and I will just more or less copy the existing, that makes it a bit faster. A new lunch here. And I put in one of those and say the cost is 200. Then we can see, first of all, it adds VAT, but it also calculates a price. In this case, it added 10%. The 200 we had here becomes 220 because we're adding 10% on top. It's setting it as chargeable because we said that we wanted that chargeability to come from the task. And in this case, the task was marked as being chargeable. But we can change the chargeability here. The same applies if we create a purchase invoice. It's almost the same. But something not everybody is aware of is that we can also have this, and I prepared an example here, that we also have the chargeable field in here, where you can set whether this is chargeable on the purchase invoice. This is something to be aware of if you are integrating with other third-party solutions that create purchase invoices. Most solutions play nice, and this will work perfectly fine, but we have seen some specific cases of other third-party solutions like document scanning solutions or expense management solutions where they have their own concept of defining chargeability. And so there could be a conflict between what we believe from a project perspective and a project expense perspective is the right thing to set as chargeability and what that other third-party app has. So this is something to be aware of. And I mentioned VAT. For that, it is a bit more complicated, but expenses are complicated. And we have this fact sheet. You can find it on our partner portal, where we try to explain all the intricacies of VAT and posting of expenses. I will not go into detail of this. What I think is an important takeaway is the VAT part of it, because in a number of countries, the VAT needs to be treated, especially if you have an expense and you are charging it to the customer, but it is part of the services that you are providing to the customer. So you could, of course, have something where you're buying something on behalf of the customer and delivering it to the customer, or the customer will be directly using what you're purchasing. In that case, you would usually recharge with the same VAT rate as you purchased with. But if the expense is to enable you to provide the service that you're providing to the client, then you would need to use the regular VAT rate when charging the client, even though you might have paid a lower rate. So This is an example setup for Swedish VAT, but much the same applies in the UK with reduced rate VAT, where we have scenarios where we have VAT coming in at a low percentage, but when we recharge it, it needs to be recharged at full rate. Business Central handles this, and that is part of the magic of the VAT posting setup, but you need to be aware of how you set up your VAT posting groups in order for this to happen automatically. You will practically need to set up different VAT product posting groups for expenses separated from the VAT product posting groups that you would use for regular services. And then you can set up that that the rule is that when we charge a domestic customer, for instance, it's always the full rate, even though the rate of that expense is lower. So this is the exception area. But when we're using business posting groups, for example, the employee paying for this expense, then we are using the rate that normally applies to this kind of expense. So that could be a reduced rate. So we could have an employee buying tickets for something, and they are paying at a 6% rate. They need to be reimbursed at a 6% rate. But when we are recharging that to the customer, we need to apply, in this case, 25% VAT to it. So small thing, but it really makes a difference. And this is, of course, important that your VAT treatment is correct.